In today's episode, we discuss Midwest versus LA living, the benefits of diversity, keeping a curious mind, philosophy, the benefits of the classics, and more. If you'd like to support the show, please hop on Renaissance-Wisdom.com and check out our exclusive line of merch and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed today's show. Today's show is brought to you by Icepod, finally an affordable, portable, and effective way to get the benefits of cold water immersion in the comfort of your own home. I opted for the Pro Bundle, which includes the Icepod, a water circulating pump, a special insulated lid, and a thermometer to check the temp of your water. Even in Georgia, the Icepod keeps my water between 60 and 70 degrees, and when I load it up with a 36-pack of water bottles that I use and refreeze after each session, I can easily get it around 50 degrees for the perfect cold water immersion experience. Despite being light and portable, the Icepod is super durable, and it's the perfect solution for anyone who wants to experience the benefits of cold water immersion without spending thousands of dollars for a home water chiller or trying to DIY your own. Cold immersion can help with recovery and muscle soreness, raise dopamine levels, help you wake up and be more alert, help you to burn more calories, mobilize brown fat, and more. Visit podcompany.com and use my special promo code SHANE50107 for $10 off your order, and each sale helps to support the show as well. Stay cool out there, people. Are you looking for the perfect high-protein snack that isn't loaded with stuff like MSG, nitrates, and sugar? Carnivore Snacks is the perfect high-protein snack made from quality grass-fed beef and salt. That's it. Each bag uses 1 pound of high-quality beef, lamb, pork, or chicken, salt, and nothing else. Aside from being easy, healthy, and convenient, they also taste great. These snacks are not just another jerky. They are way better. Give a bag a try, and I know you'll keep coming back. Check out Carnivore Snacks, spelled with an X.com, and enter coupon code SHANE05137 for 15% off your order, and each sale will help support the Renaissance Wisdom podcast as well. Welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast, where ancient and modern wisdom come together to create a better way of living. I'm your host, Shane Sorensen, and each week we speak with successful people from a plethora of disciplines in search of wisdom from their own lives. Your own personal Renaissance begins today. Let wisdom be your guide. Hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast. I'm here with today's guest, Laken Romine. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Shane. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
No problem. I'm glad we could finally link up. I know we've been exchanging messages
Yeah.
about getting something going here for a while, so
Ah,
I'm excited to pick your brain today.
I'm super excited. Feel free to ask me anything. I'm game for it.
Well, first off, for anybody that's watching the audio, I'm really intrigued by like your tapestry there in the back.
Oh,
That looks pretty.
this is actually, it's a painting. It was
Oh, okay.
done, it was a piece I commissioned from one of my good friends, Ross Pino, who is a Brooklyn-based artist, street artist, graffiti artist, mixed media. He's amazing. And so I've been in this apartment here, I guess 3 years now. And I wanted something really significant and meaningful and large. So I reached out to him, and he's not only a dear friend, but someone who's kind of had like some similar life experiences to me. So I felt like he was the right person to really bring this piece to life. And now it serves as the background of my kitchen table. So it's very cool, very, very meaningful.
Very cool for sure.
Yeah.
So why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. My name is Laken Romine. I am a model, an artist, and a creator. I currently live in Los Angeles, California. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee. I've kind of had multiple jobs and career trajectories throughout my life, but I really feel like I've found something with where I am right now that's kind of an authentic representation of who I am, what I love, And I've been able to kind of create this hybrid place of work and fuse the two together. So it's kind of an exciting place to be in now and take parts from all different my backgrounds and what I've done and kind of be here now.
Very cool. And so tell us a little bit about like what you're working on now. I know that I saw you have like a jewelry line that you're launching and you're doing a lot of modeling and it looks like you've done some acting. Like what do you have going on currently?
So for the most part, I do modeling full time. I kind of split my time between East Coast, West Coast. LA's mostly my home base now. I have kind of on again, off again relationship with a clothing line. It was something I created in the middle of COVID, and it was like a tie-dye kind of high-end luxury loungewear. Um, and aside from that, I'm also an abstract painter and mixed media artist. So I make a lot of weird collages and big abstract paintings for fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're a bit all over the place, which I know we were talking before we hit record there for a second. I really enjoy the idea of, and of course this applies to women too, but you know, there's this idea from the Renaissance man. And we think about people like Da Vinci and Michelangelo who were able to like dabble in all different types of art and dabble in philosophy and dabble in inventions and science and mathematics. And um, but yes, I really enjoy when people are kind of dabbling in different things and bringing that spirit of the Renaissance back. And that's something that I talk a lot about in my book with eudaimonia, this idea that human beings are at their best when they're constantly kind of reaching towards perfection in many different things. I
Yeah.
think that especially in the United States and in like the Western world, there's so much emphasis on running out there and specializing and just doing one thing and trying to be the very, very best at that one thing. But I think there's so much value in doing many different things and getting lots of different experiences and having different hobbies. So I love to, like I said, talk to anybody that is doing something like that. I think it's
Yeah.
very inspiring.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important. I think there is kind of what to reiterate and kind of build on what you were saying, there is this, I feel like, overarching idea in Western culture that like you choose one path and that's it, and that's all you get. And you're kind of married to that from a young age. And that's what you do, that's who you are, that's your identity. And I think that the experience of life is so much bigger than that. And I'm also a firm believer of, you don't always have to be the absolute best at something. I think you can gain wisdom, experience, the ability to meet people, to build relationships, which for me is almost far more important than like having a gold medal for being the best, because the true
Sure.
value lies in the experience itself. And it's a much more holistic web of, like I was saying, relationships, learning, kind of cross linking different things more so than just being like, yeah, on paper, I'm number one.
For sure. Part of my background, I guess it's been so many years. Time flies by. I can't believe I'm like 34,
Yeah.
but I moved from Indiana actually down to Atlanta, Georgia, in order to do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu full time. So like I'm a black
So,
belt now. At the time I moved down here, I think I was like 23 and I was a blue belt and I was just kind of starting out and I had huge dreams of being like a world champion. And I
mhm.
trained really, really, really hard. I was fully dedicated to it. I pretty basically put all of my life into it. And, you know, one day I got injured and I had some time off before a major tournament and I had time to just reflect. And one of the things that happened was I asked myself why I needed this world championship. Like what changes when I get a world championship? And when I really was really honest and I started questioning myself, I kind of realized that like nothing really changes, right? You're still
Yeah,
doing the thing that you're supposed to enjoy. The medal doesn't really change anything at all. And I realized that it was this idea that I had to prove something, I think, to myself or maybe to other people. And when I was able to let go of that, I had a lot more freedom in life to just do the things that I enjoyed.
Absolutely. It's kind of like dangling the proverbial carrot in front of yourself for
Yeah.
all of eternity. Like, okay, once I do this, I'll feel this way. Once I do this, I'll feel this way. Um, and I recently read a poem called Ithaca. I can't remember who exactly it is, but hopefully I can send a link or send it to you or whatever. And it was basically kind of what we were talking about, that it's not the accomplishment or the end goal or like becoming, meeting this mark. It's more so the person you become on the way to meet that mark that really matters. And that is within itself the greatest reward. So,
Absolutely. And we do this thing. I've been thinking a lot about this in, just recently, but this idea that we always postpone like our happiness. We
yeah.
tell ourselves, I'll be happy when I get this.
Yeah.
And then we get there, and then there's the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And happiness and contentment really is a choice in this moment. I think it's so true that if you can't be happy now, exactly where you are, exactly in this moment, you can never reach happiness until you can learn to be happy in the moment, right? Because happiness is experienced in the moment. It's not experienced in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, like you said, it's a choice. It's
For
a
sure.
thousand a choice.
Tell me a little bit about. I'm always interested. I'm a Midwestern boy. I know I was telling you I'm from a little tiny town in Indiana, and you coming from
Yeah.
Nashville, which isn't a little tiny town, right? It's a
Used to be when I was there.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. It's
Yeah.
almost like a little Vegas strip there now, but
Oh, it's definitely Nash Vegas
yeah.
nowadays.
So coming from the Midwest and going out to LA, I know, and obviously LA has changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years too,
Yeah.
but I know you said you've kind of adapted because you went out there so long, but what are some of the key differences that you pick up just in the culture and also just in growing up like in a small town versus living in a big city like LA?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. How much time do we have?
I've got
um,
time.
you've got time. Okay. My best answer to that question was I was kind of fortunate that my dad got a job transfer when I was 12 years old. So we moved from Nashville to Los Angeles. So I was kind of at this like middle school coming of age point in my life when we relocated to Los Angeles. Um, it was incredibly, incredibly hard for me the first, I would say, like 2 or 3 years. Even weird things like California's 75 and sunny all throughout the year. I came from a place that had four very distinctive seasons. And I felt like with
Mm-hmm.
those seasons came even just kind of like an emotional and spiritual closure and rebirth. And then all of a sudden it was like sunshine and palm trees for Christmas or for summer. It was kind of this like interminable happiness and sunshine that was oddly very impactful to me. Um, the people were very different. The lifestyle was radically different. The values were very different. And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. I think there's good and bad in both. I think there's pros and cons in both. One thing that I'm very, very grateful for was the level of exposure I had moving to Los Angeles and meeting people from all around the world, meeting
Mm-hmm.
people from all different backgrounds and religions. And it kind of changed my view of how the world worked and how I saw things and even what I thought was possible. Um, and I think it was such a blessing to grow up in a place where we were a little bit on the outskirts of Los Angeles. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, in the northern part of the valley. So a much more suburban area than like roaring downtown LA, Hollywood, anything like that. Um, but it was a huge cultural shift. And, all of a sudden I had friends that were from different parts of the world or spoke different languages or their parents spoke different languages. And it was so enriching and it was so eye opening. And it kind of made me feel hungry for more and to feel like the world was so much larger than I'd once perceived it. And I thought it was a really, really beautiful, really positive thing. Um, so I think I had the best opportunity. Long, like to wrap that up, it gave me a new perspective that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And I was in a space where I was very protected. Like I said, I didn't have some of the same dangerous exposures to people that are in other parts of this town. I also was living at home with my parents, so it wasn't like I was 18 years old coming to the big city trying to figure it all out, having someone, scam me on the corner of Hollywood and Highland. Like
Sure.
I had a much safer environment than I think most people do when they come from the Southeast Midwest into a large metropolis like LA. So I feel very blessed to have that and to have that perspective.
I really like because I had a similar experience when I moved to Atlanta. Although
Mm-hmm.
I was an adult-ish. I was, 20, 22, 23. But I grew up in this little tiny town in Indiana, and there was absolutely no diversity. I mean, we didn't have anybody Asian. We had like a couple of black kids that were adopted. There was like a Mexican family. I was like best friends with him growing up. And
Mm-hmm.
that was pretty much it. Like that was my exposure to any sort of diversity. And coming to Atlanta, you just driving through the suburbs, you see all different like ethnicities and all different, religions. And you see people, walking in like traditional Indian garb and traditional
Yeah.
Muslim garb and like all these different things you see. And
Yeah.
it was actually something that I really enjoyed when I first came because I've always felt like I was kind of the city boy that grew up in the small town for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of sad because I feel like before everything became so politically charged, things like diversity, like hearing diversity was kind of inspiring to me because they were like,
Yeah.
you really get to see and experience and go through all these different cultures and learn. And like you said, expand your mind, but everything's become so polarized now that it's almost like any sort of like opposing views kind of get like shut out. And I think that we collectively as a society, we've divided ourselves so much that we have like one half sitting on one side of the aisle and one half sitting on the other side of the aisle. And there's so much that people could learn from people from everywhere. And
Sure.
I hate to see that. I hate that
Yeah.
polarization, the fact that people don't really get inspired by learning from someone that maybe they disagree with anymore. It's like people
Yeah.
can't really talk.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of it's definitely, at least in my lifetime, and it feels more polarizing. And I feel like as a country we're more polarized than we've been, which is odd. And kind of sad to see because I'm of the same mindset that like I love to learn from people that are different from me or that see the world through a different lens that I do. I feel
Yeah.
like I studied anthropology and history in undergrad, and it was one of the most eye-opening things because I was able to get outside of myself and to say, oh, wow, I've actually never thought of that perspective. I've never considered that or whatever. And so you're given an opportunity to see the same story from somebody else's viewpoint. And I think it's a really beautiful, really powerful thing. And I think we should listen to each other. I think, even if it's five different people that are looking at the same thing, everyone's going to have a different point of view and a different contribution to the storyline. And I think there's value in that, an immense amount of value in that.
Yeah. I just that's one of the big things I hope that we'll see a change in the coming years is maybe a decrease in that polarity where people are able to have discussions again. Because it's like I remember, even not that I was overly political when I was a kid, but I can remember, people. I can remember the time when Democrats and Republicans like didn't really believe that much different. Like they had certain things that they disagreed
Sure.
on, and
Sure.
they may argue about those things at like Christmas dinner, but it's like now everything is so charged where it's like you go to a family get together and people are just like nothing, like you can't say anything, you
No
can't
one
like,
talks, no one
yeah,
says anything.
yeah, or
Yeah.
people just disown, like you literally see families just disown family members because they have a different, you know political belief. I know that's just politics. It's like that's different than like diversity and talking about people of different religions. But I don't know. I miss that like that openness. I miss that sense of wonder that I had when I came to Atlanta for the first time, and like you did when you went to LA, and you're like, wow, there's all these religions, there's all these worlds that I've never even
Sure.
envisioned. It's such an inspiring thing to just to be around that.
It is. It really was. And I feel like it's such a keystone of my life. And I know in the future when I have children, I want them to have that same level of exposure, just to different people and to different ways of life and walks of life and religion and background and languages. It's such a beautiful place to be in and such a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you a little bit about. I know that you have a little bit of acting experience. Like I saw that you were like a child star on The Invited. It was like an older horror movie. And um,
Yeah.
do you? I mean, do you have any plans of getting back into that? Do you do acting? Is that something that you just did as a kid that you hate now, or like what's that like?
You know, it is so funny, Shane. So, I got into acting, so I don't tell this story much, but it was when I lived in Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
and um, I was in fourth grade, and we had a fourth grade play that we had to do. And there were 4 classrooms at my middle school, and each classroom was assigned a different type of like Tennessee history or whatever. So the classroom I was in got the Grand Ole Opry, and each kid in the classroom had a different character, and my character was Minnie Pearl. I don't know if you know her or have any
No.
idea who she is. She was like a famous Grand Ole Opry actress. She was also on the show Hee Haw, which was like a redneck SNL in the
Mm-hmm.
70s and 80s. But I played her, and I absolutely fell in love with theater acting. And I thought it was amazing and so fun. Um, and then I was probably like 10 years old. And then when we moved to California, about a year and a half, 2 years later, um, the conversation kind of came up like, oh, like maybe I could do some acting or at least try. And
Because you're in
so,
LA, right? So like,
yeah,
why would you not?
right. It's like smoke them if you got them. You're here. This was like in the heyday of film and movies and just kind of every
Mm-hmm.
kind of that magical Hollywood moment that you and I were very close in age, so we grew up with. So I got an agent and I did a little bit of acting. I was on Zoe 101 and According to Jim, and I did a short film that went to Sundance and a bunch of other movie festivals, and then The Invited, which was like a, gosh, I don't know, C, maybe D level horror film.
Uh-huh.
um, but I always loved the art of performing, and it it's something I feel like I still do with modeling. It's just not as verbal. However, it's come up to me and it's been in many conversations recently where people have been like, "Oh, have you done acting? Would you consider acting? Do you want to do acting?" So I'm like, maybe I should go back to my roots. Maybe there's something here that I'm missing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But I'm definitely open to it. It's very different than modeling, and it's very different the hours and the workload and even like the expectation. But I mean, yeah, I'm 1,000% open to it.
Sure. And I guess I don't know. Like I'm assuming that there's probably a little bit more longevity in acting to a sense, right? Like modeling, you
Yeah,
kind of have a little bit more of a window that you have to fall within. That's just part of being a human being. But
you do.
yeah,
You do. I mean, I will say with modeling, the good thing is that the industry and where it is now is not where it was 15, 20 years ago.
mm,
I'm 31
yeah,
years old. No way I'd be able to do this just based off age alone. Um, Most of the work that I'm cast for is like from the 24 to 27 range. So that's good that I'm playing younger, but 15, 20 years ago, this was never on the table.
sure.
Um, I think the longevity of acting is very different. Um, but it's also, it's hard too. Like
Yeah.
unless you are doing big roles or you're on a sitcom or you're a big star, it's really hard to make money and support yourself um, doing that.
I mean, what was your experience like being a teenager? Because it sounds like a lot of the acting that you did was kind of in like your teenage years. I mean, how is that like when you're still so, I guess, like formative? Is it confusing to start like adapting to different roles when you don't even really have yourself figured out yet? Or
I mean, there was definitely some some like weird things that I think about it in
yeah,
retrospect. Um, I think I hadn't had enough life experience to really understand some of the roles that I was reading for. I have an incredible family. I had an incredible upbringing. I had a great community of friends, and like I would get these crazy dark scripts, and I was like, I don't even know. I don't know what's happening.
yeah,
Um, but at 31, I think it would be a different story because I've had so much more life experience. It was very confusing, I think, when I was younger. And by the time I was probably 14, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, a school play is cool. Um, Getting up, acting with your friends for 2 or 3 weeks to do a Romeo and Juliet or like whatever the school production was still fun to me versus trying to like wrap my head around these bizarre different characters that I just couldn't comprehend. Um, so by the time I was 14, I would say I was really overacting.
yeah.
And maybe even a little bit before that. I fell in love with sports, volleyball, track, and so that really took up most of my high school experience.
Yeah, I had a guy. My day job, I like manage, partially own some gyms here in Atlanta, and we had a guy that came and signed up the other day, and I don't want to give like too much information, but he's an actor and he's getting ready to kind of do his like big debut scene, and so he's coming in to do some training with us to just make sure that he's kind of like ready for his role and in shape and all that. And he's like telling us about the role, what he's able to tell us, because of course there's like an NDA and everything, but he just casually is like, yeah, the character is like really dark and has all these issues, and they're telling me I'll probably need to take some therapy like after the role. And I'm like, that just sounds terrible to like have to immerse yourself into these like some of these like dark uh
Yeah,
bad places, and you're kind of like inventing this trauma that kind of, I mean, obviously you did it for a very short time, but I could
right.
see how like that's the real work in acting, right? I guess is just
Absolutely. And the hours are exhausting.
yeah,
I mean, you're working 14, 15, 16, 18-hour days. Um, you're kind of period for shooting is really tight. It's really small. It's like, we've got to do 16-hour days for a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is to get it done. My boyfriend's in film. He's a producer, and so his job is I feel like close enough to storytelling and kind of the parts of movies and film that I really love, but it's not so in the trenches, really.
Yeah.
Because that's tough. I mean, it's trench warfare, and you see, I don't know, parts you read for on billboards, and you're like, oh, that could have been me. And I've heard it from different friends that are actors or different people in the industry, and it's very psychologically tough. Not only, I think, to be an amazing actor, you have to go to dark places and very complicated places. But I think on the other side too, you're navigating an industry of long hours, low pay, your rivals, this, that. Like it's not for the faint of heart, I would
Sure.
say.
And so, yeah, I mean, it sounds like generally you enjoy modeling more. It seems like that's really what you're gravitating to. Do you have like any experiences through modeling that really stand out, or any like memories, any things that you've gone through that you really think back to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the one that I always jokingly call my magnum opus is I walked for Schiaparelli, which is a high fashion couture designer based out of Paris. And the original designer, Elsa Schiaparelli, was very good friends with Salvador Dali. And the line still kind of pays homage to the surreal designs and kind of the surreal spirit of Elsa Schiaparelli. And so I would say, I think like 3-4 years back, the runway show was actually at the Salvador Dali Museum. And Salvador Dali is my favorite painter. So it was so cool because here I was in this Parisian haute couture walking next to some of my favorite pieces of art ever created. And it was this really, really beautiful dynamic fusion. And I still look at the pictures from it and I'm like, there's no way this actually happened to me. Because it's such a cool moment. And it was such a beautiful marriage of both art and fashion. So that one always is very, very high up for me.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
it kind of leads me into the next thing. I know that you're very into art. You're into architecture. I know that you said you studied, anthropology, and I know you're into architecture and reading.
Yeah.
What is it about, the past, or what is it about some of these older things that inspires you?
Um, it's a complex question.
Sure.
I think good art for me, I feel like is God materialized. I feel like anything that I look at and feel that I'm inspired by, it kind of brings me closer to the highest version of myself. Um, at least that's my perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think history for me has always been something that I've loved. I was so fortunate. I had 5 great grandparents until I was 10 years old, 4 until I was 16,
Wow.
and my last great grandparent passed away when I was 28 years old. So I had this amazing connection to my family that they'd lived through both world wars and the Depression and all of these changing events that I only knew about from books, but I had the ability to talk to them about. I used to watch old movies with my great grandmother, and she would introduce me to Hitchcock movies and old foreign films. And so I got to kind of see what was celebrated in her time with her, with someone who was actually there. And I think all of those play a really significant role in my life. Um, I also just love, when I was young, I loved ancient Egypt, and I believe Howard Carter found King Tut's tomb in 1922, which kind of set off this like massive boom of this ancient Egypt obsession throughout the world. And a lot of 1920s and 1930s Art Deco is inspired and taken from kind of this discovery of this ancient Egyptian tomb. And so those weave together always appealed to me. My favorite movie growing up was The Wizard of Oz, and seeing that with my grandmother, and also just the influences of seeing the actual footage from the original movie premiere with Judy Garland and with everyone at the Man's Chinese Theater was really iconic too. So it was kind of cool to have all of those moments together and then draw from them. I think too, maybe I just romanticize the past,
Mm-hmm.
as I think some people do. You know, you look back and you're like, oh wow, people were so much more artistic or expressive, and it's like, well, maybe, but who really knows? You know, that could just be your own romanticism of days gone by.
Sure. There's a lot of good points there I want to touch on, like with
Yeah, sorry, that was a lot to give.
no, it's good.
It's like,
That lot of good stuff. The golden age thinking.
mhm.
I can't remember what this movie was, and I want to say maybe it was Midnight in Paris, but I don't know if it was, but it was like this movie where this guy lived in like the semi-modern age. It was like the 2000s, and he talked about how great like the 1960s were. And then
Yeah.
or I think it was like the 1940s, and he like goes back to the
Oh,
1940s
it
and
is
like
one film, Midnight in Paris.
it was Midnight in Paris, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
Midnight in Paris.
and then they go back to like 1910, and then everyone's like, oh, like 1890 was so great, and they just keep going back, and they
Totally.
just keep going back, and there's
Yeah.
they get back and they realize there's all these problems in the people that are living. So I think that that's certainly something that I try to think about when when I look back to like the Renaissance, this golden age that I look back to is like,
Right.
yeah, it was a lot of good stuff, but the plague killed like 70% of the population, and there were huge divides in like the wealth gap, and yeah, so it is important, I think, to not romanticize too much, but to
Sure.
appreciate, and something that I talk about in my book, and especially in this like kind of modern climate that we're in, is when you talk about Western philosophy, or you talk about like the Renaissance, or some of these like, when you talk about Rome or Greece, a lot of times people kind of just put it off, and they're like, well, they're just colonizers, and they're like, and it's like we're supposed to forget all of the great things that we learned, all the art, all the sciences, all the developments, all the good, just because maybe they owned slaves at that time, or because like they weren't as enlightened, right? But period, like societies go through these periods where maybe we get a little bit more open-minded, but there's this progression towards something, right? And it is important, right, like not to get caught up in the golden age, to recognize that the times weren't perfect, but at the same time
Yeah,
to be able to look objectively and pull things that are valuable out, because
absolutely.
there's so much wisdom, like you said, from even just back from like the World War II generation, or the people who lived through the Great Depression. I mean, imagine how much wisdom those people have or had to pass on to us, and people are like, oh, they're just old, like just
Yeah.
don't listen to them. But it's life experience brings wisdom. If you keep your mind open, you have a little bit of an open mind to just try to pick up those things as you go. There's so much that you
Yeah,
can teach somebody. And
absolutely.
when you talked about art too, I think that like something I dislike about modern art, and not all modern
Hmm.
art, right? I don't want to completely generalize, but like the super, super like crazy postmodern, or like the Dada art, for example, like like I get it. I get it's a statement, but to me, when you go and you look at an exhibit and there's like a toilet and it has like yellow paint all over it, like that's not, what does that really inspire? I know maybe there's some kind of message there. I get it. It's an expression.
Yeah.
Art is art, but like when you go to the Sistine Chapel, and you look
Yeah.
at the creation of Adam, or you look at the thing behind you, even like you look at the art behind you, you look at something like beautiful. There's something that you can see there that's lasting, and it's hard to put into words, right? But it inspires something in you. You see it, and
Yeah.
there's a spirit inside of this like bag of meat that we are, and it sees that beauty. And Plato even talked about that all the way back in the ancient world in philosophy, that the poets and the artists, they were tapping into this divine beauty. And the reason that it inspires people is because it's just like a little piece of the divine that we can see. And
Yeah.
we see it in nature. And there's a reason that some of the things from the ancient world, there's a reason that the Iliad and the Odyssey are still read today, and people still read it and they're inspired because they tapped into something. There's some things that transcend the time that they were written in, and I think it's important, for us to appreciate that, not to just throw things out. But
Yeah.
so, on the topic of reading, right? I know that sounds like you do a fair bit of reading, and you're pretty diverse in what you get into. Like, what are your some of your favorite topics or favorite things to read?
Like top five. Top
Well,
five favorite books.
I'm gonna ask you later in a later section. I'm gonna ask you your top two. So I'm gonna make you narrow it all the way down to two. But like,
Okay.
just in general, I mean, do you enjoy fiction, nonfiction? You enjoy history, a little bit of
I would
everything?
say
Like,
a mix of everything. I'm not as into fiction. I prefer more nonfiction, history, um, philosophy, poetry. There's my romanticism showing again. Even like, I don't want to say like pseudo self help, but like the Four Agreements, I think is an incredible book.
mm-hmm.
Um, but things that offer wisdom um, and some degree of application for me are what really stick out the most. And I
Yeah,
really tend to.
I had a long period, like maybe 10 years of my life, where I basically decided I wasn't going to read fiction anymore. I was like, I only want
Yeah.
to read stuff that I can learn from. And I
Yeah.
just dug into all these, like, and self-help is a really broad, such a broad category, but
Right.
I'd read books on speaking, I'd read books on sales, I'd read books on just general self-help, on relationships, on how to become a man, like all this different stuff I read, and I just absorbed. And I guess over time those things helped me sort of shape who I am. And
Yeah.
I got into the Renaissance, and I was starting to do research for my book, and I wanted to read some of the things that inspired the people of the Renaissance. So I read
Mhm.
like the Decameron by Boccaccio, and I started to read some Shakespeare, and um, I read Homer. I was like, of course, like all these people would have read Homer, and they loved Homer, so I should read Homer. And
Yeah.
I have a whole new appreciation for fiction that I didn't used to have. And so now I'm even like, I read like 1984, and I read some Hemingway, and I'm just trying
Yeah.
to absorb some of these classics, because again, I think like there's a reason that things become classics. There's a
Yeah.
reason that these stories, some of these stories have been around for thousands of years, or even for hundreds of years. Like there are books that came out in early American history that they're just they're so inspiring. I mean, like you read The Great Gatsby, or
Yeah.
F. Scott Fitzgerald. I mean, there's so much
Oscar.
beauty there. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever
The
read A Portrait of Dorian Gray?
Read what?
A Portrait of Dorian Gray.
I have not.
It's definitely one to check. I love it. I reread it almost every year. Um, I think Oscar Wilde's brilliant, but I think you would enjoy it because it's very much in that same vein of an incredible classic that really just, it's a piece of heaven for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is about some of those period pieces too that it's just inspiring. It taps into you. I guess it's raw. It's emotional. It really taps you into like that heartbeat of life. I suppose they're able to. Um, I guess it's something I've been going through. Right, I've been going through a lot of spiritual things recently, and I think so much about how we get so caught up in life. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're so fixated on just going to work and making money and paying bills and our
Yeah.
dreams and our goals and our ambitions that sometimes it's like we don't even stop to think about like the people that we care about or the people, the things in our lives that we truly cherish. So something
Sure.
I've been trying to do a practice of more recently is just being grateful and prayer and reminding myself of the things in my life that I take for granted. And I suppose that's what some of those books do, right? Is it takes you out of your life for a second and makes you realize there's more to life than just like consumerism, just the
Of
acquisition of
course.
things.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's interesting to bring that up because I feel like I've been going through some similar stuff the last few weeks just with work, transition, everything. And so it's the one thing kind of talking about sitting down, thinking, being grateful, saying thank you, reprioritizing, kind of getting out of your own narrative in life and paying attention to other people and the world around you, and whether that's through reading or I love to go to museums. So museums are a big thing for me too. But it's so important. I think it's so important to even say thank you because, like we were talking earlier, you do all these things, you accomplish all these things, but you're never, it's like by the time you get it, you don't even care about it. And
Right.
it's so important to have the gratitude for the things you once only dreamt of.
Yeah. The proverbial carrot that just
Yeah.
dangles and you're,
Keep staying.
and you grab it and as you open your hands and you look and it's gone and it's back in front of you again. You're like, where did it go? How did that even
Yeah,
happen? But, there is something very grounding about gratitude. I think just being
absolutely.
being grateful. I think that's a big key to happiness that I've been thinking a lot about lately.
Yeah. And I think in a way you're able to also ironically it's almost like more good things start to happen because I think you shift your perspective and you're like, "Oh, I'm not just focusing on the one thing I don't have. I have nine amazing things." And to begin with, I was just looking at the one thing I didn't have, whereas now I'm looking at the nine incredible things I have and maybe the one thing that I feel I lack.
Right. There's something to the law of attraction, right? That
Yeah,
there's something to it. Like I
very real.
still sometimes I'm like, like maybe there really is some kind of charge or some kind of like energy thing happening. Um, I recently was reading through. There's this, I think it's called the Gateway Experience. I don't know if you've read this. It's this declassified document from the 70s
Ooh.
that the CIA did, and it's like called the Gateway Project, and they basically were looking at mediums and meditation, and they were using like sound frequencies to allow people to escape their bodies and have like transcendental experiences and go out and like interact with the world. And it's really crazy because, like I said, this is a CIA document that got
Yeah,
declassified, but he literally says that life is a projection, like everything in the universe
yeah,
is a projection, and that there's evidence for this. And of course, it's like science from the 70s, it's pseudoscience, take it for what you will, but
sure.
um, someone in the CIA and the government, 40 years ago thought that, or 50 years ago thought this was important enough to put together.
Yeah.
And whether you believe in all the like the woo woo or not, right? It is true that when you focus on the things you're grateful for, when you focus on the things that are good in your life, it seems like more
Mm-hmm.
things keep coming, and you're more encouraged, you have more energy, you get out there, you go after more things, and it's like you're in this mindset of abundance, and so you give more freely, you receive more freely, versus when you're thinking about everything that's wrong, it's like one good thing comes in and you just like grasp it, and because you grasp it so hard, it like a relationship, right?
Right.
If you believe that the only thing in your life that could make you happy is a relationship, and it's going to be so hard for you to have a successful relationship, because
Yeah.
that person is going to be like chained up, right? There's going to be so much pressure on that person to try to be your source of happiness, versus once you've completed yourself, once you find happiness within, you have love to give, as opposed to just like always pulling. Um,
Right.
and I think it's the same thing with just everything in life, right? The more you're complete, the more you're grateful, the more you have love to give, the more those things are attracted to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's very much like you said, the law of attraction. I think what you focus on, you become. And when you focus on the gratitude and being and understanding that you yourself are already whole and full and you're not lacking or needing of anything, I think those things come back to you in your life tenfold.
Right.
Sorry.
Oh, good. Even, even, yeah, I don't know. Today is like the day of tech difficulties. I don't know what is going
Yeah.
on.
You
Yeah.
just gruntle. It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, even just like basic confidence though, right? With
Yeah.
like when you feel good about yourself, you're confident, you go out, like imagine, you feel like everything is wrong and you go to a job interview, and how different the same job interview could be in a day where you wake up and you think about everything that you're grateful for, and you think about like I experience it in sales all the time.
Hmm.
Sometimes in sales you get in this slump where it's like you're selling everybody that walks in the door signs up, like everything's going good, and then you get like 10 people in a row that come in, and like you couldn't have sold them anyway, they just weren't ready to buy.
Yeah.
But then you start like questioning yourself, and you're like, man, like maybe I'm losing it. I had like 10 people in a row and I couldn't sell them. And then like you kind of have this like desperation of like the next person that comes in, I've got to sell them. And then the person
Hmm.
shows up and it's like they want to buy, but they can sense your desperation, and then you'll, yeah, and you end up in this
Yeah.
slump where you don't sell anything for like a week, and you're just questioning everything. You're questioning yourself, and
Right.
then something happens and you sell one person again, and you're like, okay, like I can still sell. And
Oh yeah.
um
No, it's the same way with me for castings. Like I'll, think I'm feeling good or whatever, and I'll go in and I'll be like, hey, I think that went really well. Uh, didn't get the job, and then it's like I'll go to another casting, and it's the same thing. I'm like, wow, I want to book this, or I need this, or it's so important to me, and I didn't get it. And then
yeah.
the third or fourth one I'll go into, I'll be like, you know what? This client would never like me. They'll never want me. It's a casting call of 200 people, and then you book it like that. And it's
Mm,
because you don't want it,
yeah.
because you don't have that desperation. And I think sometimes too, like there's just a presence versus, even I struggle with it too, having control over the situation or wanting to be able to control the situation. And a lot of times when I just take a step back and I'm like, you know what, I'll just give it to the universe, give it to God. And it, honestly, it usually works out much, much better for
Yeah.
me than try to, like you say, just force, your clients to sign up or to do whatever it is. It's like, it's just too much. Um,
That makes me think of this story. So when I was doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu and I was competing, I put so
mhm.
much pressure on myself because I wanted to be a world champion. Like this was it. And I'd do
Mm-hmm.
all these big tournaments and I'd always get like third place or second place. Like I always was on the podium, but I never got first. And the first like gold medal, well, not the first gold medal, the first big gold medal that I got at a big competition. I remember we were in New York. It was at this like big New York Pro. It was like the first time that the organization had done this tournament. And I was there with a couple of friends and I was just burnt out. Like
Yeah.
I was like, man, they were all excited to compete. And I was like, man, I don't want to fucking be here. Like, I'm tired of cutting weight. I'm tired of being broke. I'm tired of like just training all the time and my body hurts. And I was like, I just don't even want to be here. Like, I don't want to compete. I just want to get this over and go home. And I got
Mm-hmm.
gold that day. I destroyed everybody. And then, I went and I did the absolute, and the absolute is like open weight class. So I was going against people that were a lot bigger, and I did really well. And the guy I lost to like just destroyed everyone. He submitted every single person that he went with, and I lost to him by like a couple points, you know. And that guy's
Wow.
this is many years later, but that guy's like now a black belt world champion. So
Wow.
it was when
Incredible.
I just didn't care that I did well, and it's ironic
Yeah.
that was happening at a time when I kind of like quit jujitsu and I stopped training for a while. And that was probably when I was at my very best, was that day that I just didn't even want to be there. I just,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
It's so funny. It's like the grave irony of life. It's like, how do I find this yin and yang between wanting, doing, being my best, and then also just knowing that like I can't, I have no control over certain things, and it's just a divine. I don't know. It's crazy. I struggle with it all the time.
Yeah. It's a
It's
balance.
one of It is, but it's one of the things that I think is it haunts me the most because it's such a fine line in my mind to be like, I did my absolute best versus should I do something more? Am I doing enough?
Mm.
Um, I don't know. It's something I really it's a hard place to be.
Yeah. It's a hard, like I've been thinking so much lately through philosophy too about these polarities where a lot of times we think that we just want to be in the middle, you know, we want to find that line, but the problem is the line is like always changing too, right? Because in one situation it's like maybe you need to be 5 steps to the left of the line, and then in another situation you need to be 5 steps to the right of the line. It's not like this straight line. We have to be able to zigzag and at times maybe shift to one side or um back to the other side. And I think maybe that's the part that's frustrating, right? It was like, just as human beings, we're like,
Yeah,
give me the blueprint. Like, this is the way to do it. But it's
right.
just,
Uh,
there's no blueprint. There's just a way for
there's
every situation.
Yeah, and I think too, like I don't know a ton about jujitsu, but I'm gonna make a sweeping generalization that it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of focus, um, and structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I work great with structure. I'm like, okay, tell me what I need to do to check the boxes and we can get it done. How do we fast track this? How do we do this? And life is kind of this it doesn't work like that. It's a much more energetic, holistic experience of, like you're saying, kind of being on this continuum of fluctuations and undulations. And so it's more about learning to pivot and adjust than it is having someone pass you a sheet of paper and say, check the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an adventure.
Yeah. Jiu-jitsu is the same way, by the way. It's chaos. Like everyone everyone talks about like, oh, it's the gentle art and all that, but it's human chess. It's like you're sparring with somebody, you're competing with someone, and they want to apply leverage to choke you unconscious or to break your limbs, and you want to do the same to them. And there's
Wow.
just there's points and there's time, and sometimes there are like rules in jujitsu, like never do this, never do that. But just like life,
Sure.
there are times where that's not true. Like, you know, someone may say, never do this move, never, ever, ever do this move. Like, this move sucks. It's terrible. If you do this move, you're going to get beat every single time. And then there will be like one person that decides to make that their move, and they'll just defeat everyone with the move that like everyone said you're not supposed to do because it's terrible. And it, it just, people just make it work, just like life, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. It's about making it work at the end of the day.
I think so.
Yeah.
With I wanted to ask you too, I know you said you read philosophy. What, any particular philosophers that you really are into, or anything you've learned from philosophy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest for me, which is also probably the most well known, is I love Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's incredible. I read it. I was like, wow, where has this been all my life?
Right.
I think Stoics as a whole are, it's such an incredible philosophy for dealing with life, and I at times can be very neurotic, and I'm also a worrier, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what if this happens? Oh my gosh, what if, and I drive myself and everyone else around me crazy. So finding something to temper that and to look, especially from a much more, like, I think with the Marcus Aurelius and many of the Cynics, I would argue, or Stoics, not Cynics, Stoics. I was thinking of Seneca in my head. That's why he's my favorite. I think he's really interesting, and he's very diesel, which I like. But they dealt with things as they were. And I also feel like they had such a great ability to pull back from the problem at hand and kind of look at the macro scale of what was happening, what that effect would be, and to evaluate it from a much more logical standpoint, which I think sometimes, just very honestly, like, I mean, I take a lot from Stoicism and Zen Buddhism, but I also know that I'm hardwired to be, like I said, neurotic, to worry about things, to be like, oh my gosh, is this enough? Did I do that correctly? So having literature and philosophy and really being able to connect with these people and these thinkers from the past who were so successful and were able to manage their lives and their emotions, which are far more difficult than anything I deal with in a daily scale, is a really incredible thing. And I'm so grateful that I found that wisdom to implement in my own life.
Definitely. I love the Stoics, right? There's so much practical wisdom in Stoicism. And a lot of it is about acceptance, and a lot of it is about learning, as like Eckhart Tolle would say, like learning to be the outside observer, right, of your emotions, as opposed to letting your emotions run you, being the person that steps outside and says, I am a person that's feeling anger, is very different than feeling anger. And I will tell you, right, because it's all about that balance. I don't know if you've ever heard there's like a Stoic fragment about a Stoic teacher that was on a ship. And so he's on this ship, and then there's a huge storm that comes in, and basically everyone thinks they're going to die. Like, this ship's about to capsize. It's getting broken apart. Everyone is clinging on the ship, like just holding on, hoping they don't get thrown overboard, including the Stoic philosopher, who's supposed to be this like sage-like, monk that is unmoved by life and everything. And so they finally make it out. They survive somehow, and they're getting out. Everybody's like exhausted. They didn't sleep. Everyone's stressed out. I mean, imagine being on a boat in the middle of the ocean thinking you're going to die for 5 hours straight. Yeah. And they're all unloading, and of course they're probably all looking like rats that just like crawled out of the sewer. And some guy kind of jests at the Stoic philosopher, and he says, hey, for being a Stoic philosopher, you were clinging onto the edge of the ship pretty hard, right? And he responded that because I'm a Stoic philosopher, I am smart enough to understand what I have to lose, which he's talking about his life, right? Because of his ability to have a little bit of wisdom, he understands the importance of life. And so he was fearful to lose it. And I think that the lesson that I take from that story is that it's natural to have these emotions, right? I think sometimes people construe stoicism into being this thing where you're not supposed to be emotional, you're not supposed to fear. It's feeling those things, understanding that it's part of being human,
Sure.
and just kind of using our logic to navigate those things as opposed to letting them just control us. So
Yeah, absolutely. No,
I don't know.
I that's a very wise perspective on it, and I love that story. That's a great one.
I think it's, like I said, it's a Stoic fragment. I can't remember where it came from. It might have been like Musonius Rufus or something, but I believe where I read it for the first time was in How to Think Like a Roman Emperor by Donald Robertson. I
Okay.
believe that that's where I read it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, I've got a couple of questions I ask all my
Okay.
guests. I just want to kind of run through just a little bit about like habits and some of the things that you do that maybe people can take from your experience. So the first one I like to ask is if you have any like major setbacks or roadblocks or crossroads that you've experienced in your life, and maybe what was it and what was a lesson that you pulled from that thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, probably it was getting sober 3 years ago,
Hmm.
which is it's a huge milestone for me. It's not something I talk about publicly a lot, um, but I'll celebrate 3 years of sobriety this August next month, which is a
Congrats.
huge
Yeah, that's
thing.
awesome. Good for you.
Um, but it was the way I kind of always like to sum it up is that sobriety was the greatest journey home to myself. And it was I think asking for help and getting help could be seen as a setback or a step forward. For me, I definitely see it as a massive step forward and just kind of the ultimate redirection of my own life. Um, but it's hard. I struggled with alcohol and drug addiction for a decade of my life. So from the time I was 18 to the time I was 28, I don't feel like those years really mattered or had much purpose. I mean, I did things, I accomplished things, but they weren't to the magnitude or even to the value um, of what I wanted. And it's hard to be in your late 20s and be like, wow, I've done nothing with my life and I can't stand the people around me and I don't feel like who I actually am and what I've become even correlate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't necessarily looking back take it as a step back. I'm dealing with Stoic philosophy. I'm sure you know that if you were to ask any of the Stoics, they would say this was your fate. This is
Right.
what it was supposed to be, and this was a gift given to you. And so for me, I really see it from that perspective because I don't think I could be the person at 31 years old if I didn't have that 10-year experience. And at the end of that, the journey back to myself. Um, so, what I feel like could be one of the hardest parts of my life is actually simultaneously the most rewarding and one of the moments I'm the most proud of.
Mm. That's really beautiful, and I
Thank you.
I thank you for sharing that. I know it's very personal too, so I think that some people will be inspired by that, and I think that your your story is really really striking because, as you mentioned, like a lot of times things are kind of like hidden blessings. You know what I mean? Like, for example,
Yeah.
you can get fired from a job and it feels terrible, but it's actually this like great opportunity because you get out there and you start that business or whatever, where it's not really like that bad or like that traumatic, right? But dealing with something like addiction, right? It's hard to see a positive that comes out of that. It's
Yeah.
just a terrible experience for anyone to go through. And so I think for you to be able to look back on that and still be grateful for that experience because it made you who you are, and it probably gives you a lot more gratitude for life and the person that you are. I think that's really inspiring, right? Because it's showing how bad something can be and you can still pull something positive out of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been such an interesting catalyst in the last 3 years, like learning how to be an adult person and how to navigate life. And it's also given me the confidence to ask for more and to also not see obstacles as ending points for myself.
Right.
Because I know I'm like, oh, okay, like I've been through things that are bigger, darker, deeper, etc. I can go through this. I can push through this. I know what I'm capable of. I think the biggest for me was when I started modeling again, because 2.5, 3 years ago, I was working as a medical sales rep. And I hadn't really touched modeling or done much with it since I was young, like I was saying, 13, 14 years old. So I thought, I was like, I don't feel like the best version of myself. And I know that if I can make it through these darkest moments, I can go and venture. And even if I fail, I'll still be okay. I can still go do something else or try something else. When I started my brand, it was the same philosophy. I was like, why not try? Who cares? It fails. No one wants to buy the product. Great. You can go do something else. Like, no, right. It's not that earth shattering. And some of the things in my life that I've experienced have been, and I've made it through. And so I feel okay taking calculated, I should preface that, calculated risk. And I'm so grateful that I was given kind of this bad experiences, because it's given me so much more in the process of healing.
For sure. That's awesome. And it's something that I really, and that's a huge part of my book. It's a huge part of my belief set, right? Is that just like the Stoics, right? I always say life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you, right? Like all these things that happen, it's your fate. And I think that's one thing that with kind of like people aren't really into religion as much anymore. And I think that's something that we've really, really lost in society. And part of, my belief is part of why it's so chaotic is because people look at the chaos and they can't see like the beauty of it, right? They don't have any belief that there is, the ancient Greeks believed that there was this like spinner that would weave our fate, and people believed that God was kind of orchestrating things. And when you see bad things happening or you see chaos and you believe that there's like a benevolent force or you believe there's a reason for it, it's a little bit easier to swallow versus like you're just out there in the chaos and there's no reason for anything. It's just a very different experience.
Sorry.
You're good.
So I'm gonna have to plug my phone up. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're good.
It's battery, but I am here. We can cut this out.
We're wrapping up too, so.
Sorry. No, we're good. I just our phones are so terrible. All over the place.
Yeah.
They're terrible. We're not ready for this podcast.
Yeah. All right. So the next thing I want to ask you, I'd like to ask everyone about habits, right? Habits are hugely, hugely crucial, and the people that we become, the things that we achieve. What sort of daily habits do you like to engage in?
I would say there's two things that really help me. The first thing is, and this is like so simple, I feel like if you're not really a daily habit person or you don't know where to start, I love having my coffee and just kind of setting my intention for the day, not being on my phone, not talking to people, not dealing with emails or being bombarded, but actually just having a moment of, I'm very, very sleepy in the morning. And so having a moment just to sit, drink coffee, set my intentions, think about the day ahead of me, what I want to do, who I want to go to bed as, and kind of mentally like get in that headspace so that by the time I do start answering emails or taking phone calls or I'm in the car headed to work, whatever, I'm not bombarded by all these different things. It's kind of giving myself the space to wake up in the morning and to be present for the day. The other thing that I really love to do, you can do it once a day, twice a day, is I listen to, I'm going to totally butcher this, so I'm sorry, but I believe it's pronounced Ho'oponopono. It's a Hawaiian prayer or chant, and it basically says, I love you, thank you, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And it's my morning meditation and also my evening meditation. And I feel like it gives me, I visualize saying it to a younger version of myself or my inner child, as kind of maybe corny as that sounds. But it gives me a lot of peace and it centers me. And I feel like even with the stresses or pressures from life or from myself or from my own expectation, when I'm able to look at myself and who I am and even visualize the younger version of myself, I'm so much nicer and more hopeful. And I think those are probably like my two biggest daily habits for myself that really
Yeah, it's super important. And, I had just had a conversation the last podcast I did. I talked with the guy. He's, we talked a little bit about Greek Orthodox. So he's Greek Orthodox, and I've had a lot of guests bring this up, like talk about prayer, and something that I've been doing. And actually the reason that my alarm kept going off is because I have timers set for like prayer, and I normally try to remind myself during the week. So, I'll do it like first thing when I get up, I'll do like a meditation and take a cold bath. And then I'll do like, like a prayer kind of like centering around like 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and then usually like at night and then before I go to bed. And like, that's like how prayer is supposed to work, right? Because it's about connecting you to God. It's about connecting you to, and in your case, right, you're connecting yourself more to the person that you want to be, your idea of yourself. And we're running through life where it's like everything is moving a million miles an hour. There's all these things going on. And when you don't just connect, you just get disconnected. You get like you're like
lost.
you're like a rat in a maze, and you're just running around, just trying to like find your food, trying to find the water. And prayer is so powerful for that. I mean, I think that's the point of prayer. And when you look at like Islam, that's where so much of their culture and the beauty of their religion comes from, is that the act of like prayer and submission multiple times, reminding yourself and connecting yourself to something beyond yourself. I think that's really, really powerful, whether you're religious or spiritual or none of the sort, even if you're just envisioning your inner child and reminding yourself of what kind of person that child wanted to grow up into and trying to be that person. I mean, that's incredibly impactful as well.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask you now about the book recommendations. So you gotta narrow it down to two, or if you really can't do two, I'll allow you to have a third. Sometimes people throw a third one out there, but what are your top two book recommendations?
I feel bad because I think I've already said both of them today.
Okay, that's fine.
So I would definitely recommend Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I think especially both of us, Renaissance Wisdom and kind of having a stoic flair, I think it's only appropriate to include that meditation. I really love the Four Agreements as well. But but I love that one because I feel like it's very tactile, and I feel like it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. I love the check boxes, right? It's like, here
Mm-hmm.
are actual steps. It's not as meta, it's not as philosophical, even though I think there's a great amount of philosophy in it. It's very like, how can I improve day one? And it's not like you have to spend a lot of money, or like, oh, I'm gonna wake up and change my whole life. It's just very simple things
Mm-hmm.
that I think positively impact your everyday living. How you talk to people, how you talk to yourself, how you know, handle certain issues, etc. So I would say The Four Agreements and Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Great recommendations.
And I
I
have more.
I'm sure you do. I approve. Those are a good two to choose for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I'll save it for our next podcast.
What about heroes? Do you have any personal heroes or anyone you look up to?
I mean, my parents for me are definitely my heroes. I think they're two of the hardest working yet most giving people. They both come from very, very humble beginnings, and they've been able to do so much for themselves and for the people around them. And I love my family. I'm also an only child, so I'm very connected to my
Mm.
parents. Um, and I have so much admiration for the love and the patience that they've shown me throughout the years. So I definitely choose my mom and my dad.
Awesome. I'm an only child too, actually.
Yay!
Yeah.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, it's I every that's like the definitely the most popular answer is
Yeah.
parents, that like mom or dad. I think that's the really big one for everybody. I think that's really cool.
There's definitely other people I look up to, don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
I also don't know people, and I don't
Yeah.
know the ins and outs, the workings of, I could say, oh, I really love this model or this business person or this artist, but have I sat with them? Have I seen them at their worst? Have I seen different aspects of their personality? No, they could be awful people for all I
Yeah.
know, but I know who my parents are and who my family is, and I think the world of them.
Awesome. Yeah. I think that it makes a lot of sense, right? For it to be someone that you, like you said, intimately, because um sometimes we have a tendency to idolize folks that really shouldn't be idolized. Maybe we can look up to them in one aspect, like, hey, they're a great painter. Let me pull this
Totally,
inspiration, but maybe that's all they have
totally.
to offer. So,
Yeah.
and then the last question, which you sort of maybe gave an answer to this already. Uh, I always like to ask people if you could go back in time and give a
Hmm.
piece of advice to a younger you, presumably a angsty teenage version of yourself, whatever, give yourself some advice. What would the piece of advice be?
I I would say that this is going to sound like very Yoda-esque, but the answers that you're looking for, you already have. The things you seek, the things you want, you already have. Um, and the things you want to know, you already know.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's a much larger understanding of, it's already yours. You already know it. You already have it. The answers that you want are inside of you. They've always been inside of you. You've never had to look for other people or validation or approval or anything. Um, the things you want in life, you already have. The happiness you seek, it's already yours. So I
Yeah,
think that if the one thing I could go back in time and tell myself, it would be to share that wisdom.
it's really well said, and it's similar to what the most popular answer has been. The most popular answer has kind of been like, keep going, or, trust your path, or be patient, everything will work out. But I like you kind of take it a step beyond, and it's you already have it within you. It makes me
Yeah.
think of I have a print of this painting of Diogenes meeting Alexander, and I don't know if you've ever heard this story either, but
No.
might be a good spot to end off. But
Yeah.
there's Diogenes the Cynic, and he's known for being quite a rough fellow. He lived in a barrel, and he was known to do things like masturbate in public and pee, and they called him the
Right.
dog because people would throw scraps at him and he'd eat them off the ground, and he'd urinate in the streets. And at the same time, people really, what's that?
I said it's like current day West Hollywood.
There you go. Yeah, it's like Skid Row all over again. Uh, so people really looked up to him, though. He had a lot of wisdom, and he just basically believed that everything we had and everything that we needed, we already had. And
Yeah.
one thing that he had a barrel, he had a cloak, just like a garment that would keep him warm, and he had a spoon. One day he saw a child drinking out of the river, and he was using his hands. And he was so disgusted with himself because that's what he was using his spoon for. So reportedly, he just took his spoon and he chucked it. He got rid of the spoon, and then he only had two possessions. So Alexander the Great was a young man. He had just inherited a kingdom. He was about to go conquer the world, and he was visiting Athens, and he heard about Diogenes, and he wanted to go meet this man that everyone called the dog. And he went out, and Diogenes was laying in the sun, and his entourage walked over him, and they walked in front of the sun as they stood over him, and they said, "Rise up for your king." And Diogenes is unimpressed. He just kind of like rolled over and laid there. And Alexander said that he would give him anything that he wanted in the kingdom. Anything that you ask, I can give it to you. And his reply was to stop blocking the sun. That was all he needed. And supposedly Alexander was so impressed as they walked off. He reportedly said that if he was not Alexander, he would want to be Diogenes. And it just made me think of, what you said made me think of that, right? Is that we have everything we need. We have the happiness. We have the love. We think that we need all these things, but we really don't. And that's wisdom, is understanding how little you really need, that we already have it all.
Yeah. And I think just looking for the answers for yourself internally.
Yeah.
You don't need anything. You don't need any of these things. And just being able to really understand that sometimes like I can even think back to when I was younger and I would see certain things, and maybe I would connect pieces that other people didn't, or I would, put together, be like, oh, I think this is a really good idea. And other people would be like, I don't know, I don't see it. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized those were my blessings to see. They weren't for other people. They weren't for, other people to understand what I needed to see in that. I feel like it was God and the universe kind of being like, this is for you. So whether it's a friendship or it's a professional relationship, that's something, you should monetize or whatever, that's for you. And so, yeah.
Well said. I think that is a really, it's a really good place to end off. I really enjoyed speaking with you. If anybody, sorry, what was that?
Oh, I said it was such a pleasure, Shane. Thank you.
Absolutely. And if anybody was wanting to look you up or get in touch with you, how should people reach out?
I would say you can always DM me on Instagram. If you want a more professional approach or anything like, I feel like Instagram's the way to go. Also, always email me at my email address, lakenromine@gmail.com. Feel free to check out my website, and I hope to connect with any of the viewers that watch this and the story and the questions today resonated with.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for coming on the show, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Shane.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast, and hopefully you learned at least one lesson on today's episode. Our mission here is to uncover practical wisdom to create a better way of living for our audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us by leaving the show a review on your podcast platform of choice and by giving it a share on social media. This really helps us to grow our audience and to continue to add more episodes. If you are interested in learning more, please check out our website at renaissance-wisdom.com or check out the book that started it all, Renaissance Wisdom: How to Flourish in the Modern Day, now on Amazon. Thank you again, and may wisdom be your guide.